One day you will meet the Grim Reaper. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but one day when your time finally runs out, he'll be there. He doesn't need to knock. He doesn't need to announce himself. He waits. Patient, silent, inevitable. Most of us don't like to think about him. We shut the thought away, bury it beneath distractions. But the truth is, the Reaper has been part of our lives for far longer than we realize. He's been with us in stories, in art, in whispers around the fire. He's more than just a shadow at the end of life. He is history, he is myth, he is warning, and sometimes, strangely enough, he is comfort. Think about it, a skeleton in a hooded cloak, a scythe glinting in his bony hands. You've seen him in books, in movies, on Halloween night. Children wear his face as a mask. Writers make him witty, cruel, or strangely sympathetic. He is one of the most recognizable figures in human imagination. But here's the unsettling part. The Grim Reaper isn't just a symbol of death. He is our way of making sense of it. He is the face we've given to the one thing none of us can escape. And across centuries, across continents, people have turned death into a figure. Sometimes a goddess, sometimes a spirit, sometimes an angel. But the Reaper, this cloaked skeleton with his scythe, he is the one who endured, the one who followed us into the modern age. So why him? Why that image? Why a skeleton in a cloak carrying a scythe? That's where our story begins. To understand the Grim Reaper, we need to step back into a time of fear unlike any the world had ever seen. The year is 1347. A deadly plague arrives in Europe. Within 4 years, it will kill nearly half the population. Families vanish overnight. Streets that once rang with laughter fall silent. Church bells toll endlessly, each chime marking another burial. In some towns, there are no living left to ring them. This was the Black Death, and it changed everything. When death is everywhere, people can't ignore it. They need to see it, to name it, to give it shape. Out of this terror, the Grim Reaper emerged. But why a skeleton? Because bones were what the survivors saw. Bodies decayed quickly, leaving only skeletons behind. And skeletons, unlike flesh, couldn't be softened or disguised. They were the purest reminder of mortality. Why a cloak? Because it hid the identity of death. Anyone could be beneath that hood. Everyone one day would be. The dark robe also echoed the clothing of monks who tended the dying and buried the dead. And why a scythe? Because Europe was an agrarian society. Everyone understood the harvest. Crops grew, ripened, and were cut down when the season ended. Death worked the same way. The scythe was not just a weapon, it was the tool of a cosmic farmer, cutting down human lives when their time had come. But the plague wasn't the only influence. Ancient myths had already personified death in other forms. The Greeks spoke of Thanatos, the winged spirit of death. The Romans called him Mors. In the Bible, the angel of death carried out God's will, striking down Pharaoh's firstborn in Egypt. The Black Death wove all of these older ideas into a single image. And once people saw that figure, a skeletal harvester in a hood, they couldn't unsee it. He wasn't just a symbol of disease. He became a presence, a figure who stood at the edge of every village, who could step into any home at any time. This was the moment the Grim Reaper was born. Not just as art, but as a permanent part of our imagination. But he wasn't just born out of fear. The power of the Grim Reaper comes from the symbols he carries. And each one tells us something about how humans see death. The Grim Reaper is more than a shadowy figure. He's built piece by piece, symbol by symbol. And every detail of his appearance tells us something about how we understand death. Let's start with the most obvious part, his body, the skeleton. When you picture the Reaper, you don't imagine muscle or skin or even eyes. You imagine bones, hard, white, unchanging. A skeleton is what's left after everything else decays. In that way, it strips us of vanity. No beauty, no wealth, no titles survive. The skeleton is democracy in its purest form. Every king, every peasant, every warrior, every child, reduced to the same frame. It reminds us that death doesn't care who you are. Now look at what covers those bones, the cloak and hood. The Reaper's black robe is more than just eerie clothing. It conceals identity. You don't see a face. You don't see expressions of pity or cruelty. The hood tells us that death is faceless, impartial, anonymous. It could come for anyone at any moment, and you'll never see it coming. The robe also mirrors the garments of medieval monks, men who stood at the bedsides of the dying, who dug graves, who lowered bodies into the earth. Death was already linked to the image of the cloaked figure. The Reaper simply borrowed it. And then, in his bony hands, the most famous symbol of all, the scythe, not a sword, not a spear, not a weapon of war. The Reaper carries a tool of the harvest. He is not a soldier killing enemies. He is a farmer, harvesting lives the way wheat is cut from a field. The scythe reminds us of cycles, the planting, the growing, the ripening, and finally the cutting down. Life is seasonal, and when your season ends, the Reaper swings his blade. Sometimes he carries something else, the hourglass. Picture the sand trickling down, one grain after another. Time doesn't stop. It doesn't pause for prayer or bargains. When the last grain falls, the hourglass is turned, and another life ends. The Reaper doesn't argue. He doesn't delay. He only obeys the clock. Taken together, these symbols form a complete picture. The Reaper is impartial. He is inevitable. He is patient. He comes when the time is right and not before. And that's why the Grim Reaper feels so eternal. He isn't made from fantasy. He's made from the symbols of everyday life. Bones, robes, tools, and time. Things everyone understood centuries ago and things we still understand today. But the Reaper isn't the only face of death. Every culture has created its own figure. And when you place them side by side, you start to see just how universal this need really is. The Grim Reaper may be the most famous figure of death today, but he isn't alone. Humanity has always struggled to face mortality. And across the world, cultures have created their own guides, their own harvesters, their own watchers at the end of life. Let's take a journey. We begin in Brittany, France, with a figure known as Ankou. He is tall, skeletal, sometimes cloaked, sometimes just a shadow. Ankou drives a creaking cart through the night, collecting the souls of the dead. If you hear the wheels groaning outside your home, it means death has come for someone inside. Some stories say he carries a scythe over his shoulder, echoing the imagery we know so well. To the Bretons, Ankou wasn't a stranger. He was simply part of the landscape of life and death. From France, let's cross the ocean to Mexico, where death takes on a very different face. Santa Muerte. She is Holy Death, a skeletal figure draped in elaborate robes, often carrying a globe, a set of scales, or yes, a scythe. Unlike the Grim Reaper, Santa Muerte is not feared as an enemy. She is venerated, prayed to, loved. Millions of devotees ask her for healing, protection, even help in love or justice. Altars shine with candles, flowers, and offerings. To her followers, Santa Muerte is not the end, but the one who safely carries them across. She shows us that death can be terrifying, but it can also be tender. Now we move east to Japan, where death is embodied by the Shinigami. These death spirits are not killers. They don't drag souls away. Instead, they invite. They whisper to the dying, coaxing them to let go. In some stories, the Shinigami guide souls into the afterlife. In others, they tempt people into death. Modern culture has transformed them into famous figures in manga and anime. But their roots remind us of an older truth. Sometimes death doesn't chase us. Sometimes it simply waits and persuades. From Japan, we turn to the Islamic tradition and the angel of death, Azrael. Azrael is not a monster. He is not skeletal or frightening. Instead, he is often described as compassionate. His task is solemn, to separate the soul from the body at the appointed hour. In some stories, he is immense, with eyes and tongues as numerous as the living, each one extinguishing when a person dies. In others, he is gentle, cradling the soul like a child. Here, death is not faceless. It is divine, purposeful, and sometimes merciful. But in the ancient Aztec world, death was far less gentle. There the god Mictlantecutli reigned. Picture him, a skeletal figure with jaws stretched wide, waiting to swallow the dead. He ruled Mictlan, the underworld, a place of trials where souls traveled after death. Unlike heaven or hell, Mictlan was not about reward or punishment. It was simply where the dead belonged. His imagery was terrifying, but his role was certain. Everyone, no matter their status, passed through his realm, and finally to the cold lands of the Norse, where we meet Hel. She is the daughter of Loki, and half of her body is alive and beautiful, while the other half is dead and decayed. She rules Helheim, the place where most souls go, not just the wicked, but almost everyone who dies outside of battle. Hel is not evil. She is stern, unyielding, inevitable. Her very body shows the truth of death, beauty and decay, life and rot, bound together. Different lands, different names, different faces. Yet all of these figures reveal something the same. Humans cannot accept death as an idea. We need to see it, to hear its voice, to know it is coming. And when you line them up side by side, you begin to see why the Grim Reaper endures. Out of all these forms, he is the simplest, the starkest, no elaborate mythology, no divine backstory. Just the skeleton, the cloak, the scythe, clear, universal, easy to picture, easy to remember. But the Reaper didn't just live in myth. He stepped into our art, our churches, our very homes, reminding everyone, high or low, that he was never far away. When death swept across Europe, it wasn't enough for people to whisper about it. They needed to see it. And so the Grim Reaper stepped onto the walls of churches, into the margins of books, onto canvases and wooden blocks. One of the most striking images of this era was the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death. Picture it, skeletons leading the living in a procession, a king with his crown, a priest clutching his book, a farmer with his tools, even a child reaching for a parent's hand. All of them, young and old, rich and poor, dancing together with the dead. The message was unmistakable. Death spares no one. Artists like Hans Holbein took this further with their woodcuts. In his series, The Dance of Death, death appears in every corner of daily life. A skeleton stealing from a merchant, another whispering into the ear of a noble, another standing behind a priest, waiting. No moment, no station was free from his gaze. Death was not distant, it was a constant companion. Religion used this image with equal power. Preachers painted the Reaper in their sermons, warning their listeners that life was short and eternity was long. Repent now, they urged, because you never know when the scythe will swing. The Reaper wasn't just a reminder of mortality. He was a spiritual weapon, driving people towards salvation through fear. Art and religion gave the Reaper something more than bones and a cloak. They gave him permanence, a place in the collective imagination. He was etched into stone, carved into wood, painted on walls, carried in processions. By the Renaissance, the Grim Reaper wasn't simply an idea, he was everywhere. And once he was everywhere, it was only a matter of time before writers and thinkers gave him more than a presence. They gave him a voice. Once the Reaper had taken his place in art and religion, he moved naturally into literature, and there his role grew even deeper. Writers didn't just picture him lurking in the background. They gave him meaning. They gave him voice. In the early 14th century, Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, one of the most influential works in Western history. It was not the Grim Reaper, Scali, but Dante mapped the entire journey of the soul, hell, purgatory, and heaven, each filled with figures of judgment, immortality. Death was not a shadowy end, it was a passage, a story that continued beyond the grave. Centuries later, poets like John Donne would take death itself as their subject. In his famous poem, Death Be Not Proud, Donne speaks directly to death as if it were a person, and arrogant but ultimately powerless in the face of eternal life. Here, death was not just feared, it could be challenged, mocked, even humbled. Philosophers pushed the idea even further. To them, the Reaper was more than a myth. He was a symbol of the deepest truth of human life. Mortality shapes meaning. The awareness that we will die is what gives weight to everything we do. Without death, time is endless and therefore worthless. But with death always waiting, every choice matters. Every love, every creation, every act of courage burns brighter because it is finite. The Reaper, in this sense, became less about terror and more about philosophy. He was not simply the end of the story, but the reason the story matters at all. And yet, even with these lofty interpretations, the Reaper never lost his darker edge. Writers continued to summon him in tales of judgment, punishment, and fate. He could be mocked, yes, or explained away, but he could never be dismissed. And that may be why he survives even now, not just in poems and philosophy, but in the stories we tell on screen, in books, and even in the games we play. Even after centuries of plagues, sermons, and poems, the Grim Reaper never faded. Instead, he adapted. He walked out of the pages of dusty manuscripts and into modern culture, changing shape depending on the story we needed him to tell. Take the movies. One of the most famous portrayals of death is in Ingmar Bergman's 1957 masterpiece, The Seventh Seal. A weary knight returning from the Crusades sits down across a chessboard from death himself. The figure is cloaked, calm, patient, inevitable. The knight knows he cannot win, but he plays anyway, because as long as the game goes on, he lives. It's haunting, philosophical, and unforgettable. But the Reaper doesn't always stay solemn. Sometimes he laughs with us. In television shows like Family Guy, death shows up as a recurring character, awkward, sarcastic, almost clumsy. The scythe is still there, but the tone shifts completely. By making him funny, we soften the fear. We bring death into the living room, not as a nightmare, but as comic relief. And of course, we can't forget video games. The Reaper appears everywhere, from gothic horror titles to quirky life simulators. Sometimes he's the unbeatable boss, looming at the end of a level. Sometimes he's an NPC who shows up at just the wrong moment. In games like The Sims, when a character dies, the Reaper literally walks into the house, robe flowing, scythe in hand, before calmly ushering the soul away. Terrifying, maybe, but also strangely ordinary. Today, the Grim Reaper is a symbol we can twist in any direction. He's terrifying, he's funny, he's philosophical, he's even comforting. That flexibility is why he's lasted so long. He's a blank canvas for our deepest fears and our darkest jokes. Everywhere you look, memes, Halloween costumes, political cartoons, the Reaper is there. He's not fading, he's multiplying. But that leaves us with an even bigger question. Why do we keep doing this? Why give death a face at all? So why do we do it? Why give death a body, a face, a cloak, and a scythe? The answer lies deep in the human mind. Death, in its raw form, is abstract. You can't see it, you can't touch it. You can only feel its absence when someone you love is gone. And the human brain struggles with abstractions that big, so we give it form. We make it walk on two legs. We hand it tools. We give it a voice. By turning death into the Grim Reaper, or Enku, or Santa Muerte, or any of the others, we make it tangible. Something we can picture. Something we can point to and say, "Wes, that's what comes for us." There's comfort in that, because if death has a face, maybe it has rules. Maybe it can be bargained with. Maybe it can be understood. That illusion gives us control, however small. It also serves as a warning. The Reaper's scythe hanging over your shoulder whispers, "Time is short, live wisely." That message has been used for centuries to shape behavior. Preachers held up the Reaper to terrify congregations into repentance. Writers used him to remind readers that the clock is always ticking. Parents even invoked him to scare children away from dangerous places or reckless choices. And beneath the fear, there's a strange kind of mercy. Because if death is faceless, endless, unknowable, it's unbearable. But if death is a figure, silent, patient, impartial, then maybe in that final moment, we are not alone. Maybe someone is there to walk with us. That's the true reason the Grim Reaper endures, not just as a skeleton in a cloak, but as our mirror. He reflects our fears. He reflects our need for order in the chaos. He reflects our desire to be guided, not abandoned, at the end. And even now in our so-called modern world, where science explains so much and we try to hide death away, he hasn't disappeared. In fact, the Grim Reaper is more present than ever. In our modern world, death is something we often try to hide. Hospitals keep it behind closed doors. Funerals are quiet, private affairs. We avoid the subject, bury it under busyness and distraction. And yet, the Grim Reaper is everywhere. He walks with children on Halloween night, painted onto masks and costumes. He's scribbled in political cartoons, standing with his scythe outside the door of nations, disasters, and epidemics. He shows up in memes, on t-shirts, in satire. The image is so recognizable that you don't need words. You see the cloak, the bones, the blade, and you know. Death has arrived. In Mexico, devotion to Santa Muerte continues to grow, with altars covered in candles, food, flowers, and offerings to the skeletal saint. In Japan, the Shinigami live on in pop culture, from anime to games. Across the world, artists, writers, and storytellers summon the Reaper again and again, reshaping him for every new age. What's striking is how adaptable he has become. To some, he's still terrifying, the ultimate villain. To others, he's funny, awkward, even friendly. And to many, he's strangely comforting. The idea that when the time comes, death will not be empty. It will not be faceless. It will be a figure who arrives, does his work, and carries us across. For a world that pretends to have mastered everything, science, medicine, technology, the Reaper remains untouchable. No vaccine, no invention, no app will ever remove him. He still waits, as patient now as he was in the 14th century, and in his persistence, he proves something essential, that we still need him. Not just as a reminder of the end, but as a presence that helps us face it. So the question isn't whether the Reaper exists in our imagination today. The question is what he gives us. And that is where we end, by asking, what do we gain from knowing him? At first glance, he's just a skeleton in a cloak, a frightening picture, a shadow at the edge of life. But if you followed his story, you can see that he's so much more. The Reaper teaches us perspective. He reminds us that life is fragile, that all things end, that kings and beggars, priests and poets all walk the same road in the end. He teaches us humility. Beneath the robe, beneath the flesh, we are all bones, all equal. No wealth, no crown, no title can stand between us and him. And maybe most importantly, he teaches us meaning. Because life without an ending is endless repetition. It is mortality that gives every moment urgency. It is the Reaper's shadow that makes every kiss, every laugh, every act of courage shine brighter. Without him, nothing matters. With him, everything does. Across centuries, people have painted him in fear, written him in warning, prayed to him in desperation. Some laughed at him, some honored him, some made him gentle, some made him cruel. But always, they kept him close. And he remains with us even now, not as an enemy we can defeat, not as a nightmare to outrun, but as a companion we cannot ignore. The Grim Reaper is not just death. He is the story we tell ourselves to face death. He is the mirror that shows us who we are when we think about our ending. And as long as we live, he will walk beside us, silent, patient, waiting at the edge of time. Death is final. But the story of the Grim Reaper ensures that our conversation with it never ends. If you've enjoyed this journey with the Grim Reaper, if you felt the weight of his scythe and the stories that shaped him, then stay with us, because this is only the beginning. In our Legends Uncovered series, we'll continue to walk deeper into myth and folklore, exploring the figures that haunt us, guide us, and remind us of what it means to be human. So if you'd like to join us on that path, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel as we uncover more legends together.